week 12 of the fantasy football season, with the fantasy football trade deadline in most fantasy leagues coming up this week. This is the last chance for owners to go out there and make some deals. Here's a few plays I look to buy and trade for. The first player, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson, him and McCarthy, they're just missing on some plays over the last few weeks, and frustration has obviously kicked in. So Jefferson, he really hasn't had that huge game all season long. I know every week it's pretty much double digits, but where he went 5th, 6th overall in most fantasy drafts, the numbers just haven't lived up to the draft position the last few weeks for Jefferson. Week 9 at Detroit, 6 catches, 47 yards, a touchdown. Week 10 versus the Ravens, 4 catches, 37 yards, 12 targets. In Week 11 versus the Bears, 5 catches, 61 yards, 9 targets. So like I said, he's failed to have a game over 25 fantasy points this season is Justin Jefferson, and he's failed to have a game with at least 20 fantasy points is Jefferson, going back all the way to Week 4 at the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with all those factors, it's been a tough season for Justin Jefferson, but I still think he's got something left to go out there and get things going. And let's remember as well, J.J. McCarthy, he was out after the first couple games of the season, and he didn't return to the lineup till Week 9 was McCarthy. So him and Jefferson trying to iron things out, trying to get things going. And we know this Viking team, they're 4-6 on the season right now, where their playoff hopes aren't looking too good. But Justin Jefferson, he's still a gamer, still a guy I think that could go out there and make plays. And right now, well, he's struggling and has a tough matchup coming up at the Packers in Week 12. I think you could get him on a discount. Next player, Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. So Odunze, the last month of the season, it's been one good game, one bad game. Every other game, he's going out there and making plays for this Bear team of fantasy owners. But in my opinion, still the number one option in this passing game for the Chicago Bears is Odunze. But the last 6 games, he's only had double-digit fantasy points twice in that time is Rome Odunze. Week 8 at Baltimore, 7 catches, 114 yards, 10 targets. Week 9 at Cincinnati, Goose Egg, only 3 targets. Week 10 versus the Giants, 6 catches, 86 yards, a touchdown, 10 targets. In Week 11 in Minnesota, he didn't do much. 2 catches, 41 yards, 6 targets. Week 12, a good matchup on paper versus the Steelers. I give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season, even though I thought in last week's game, for the most part, besides the Higgins touchdown, him and Jamar Chase, they didn't do much in that ball game. So Rome Odunze, like I said, still the number one option. DJ Moore, the last couple weeks, he hasn't done much for this offense as well for the Chicago Bear team. But I think Rome Odunze, he's still a solid wide receiver. Him and Caleb Williams, going back to last season, have good rapport, and he's the player I would buy this week. The next player, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. Xavier Worthy, I've talked about him a lot this season, and I've said he's been a bust, where he's gone 5th, 6th round in most fantasy drafts. You would think there'll be more one-on-one coverage and easier plays for him to go out there and make, with Rashee Rice back in the lineup and Travis Kelce playing great football of late. But that hasn't been the case here, where 3 out of 4 games he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. I think he gave Worthy dirt cheap this week. Week 7 versus Vegas, 3 catches, 35 yards, a carry, 13 yards. Week 8 versus the Commanders, 5 catches, 53 yards. Week 9 at the Bills in that game, 3 catches, 23 yards, a carry, 7 yards. In Week 11 at Denver, him and Mahomes missed on some big plays, even though we know the Broncos are one of the better defenses in the league. 3 catches, 25 yards. So Week 12, a decent matchup versus Indianapolis. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to receivers on the season. And like I said, Worthy's got game-breaking ability, but we just haven't seen it this season, where last year in the playoffs, he really broke out and helped them get to the Super Bowl, but obviously fall short to Philly. So right now, while Worthy has struggled pretty much the whole season, he's a buy low play this week. The next player, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. Judkins, the last 3 out of 4 games, the rookie's hit a little bit of a wall, and tough matchups as well, where he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in that time. Week 7 versus Miami, 25 carries, 84 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Week 8 in New England, 9 carries, 19 yards, 3 catches, -2 yards. Week 10 at the Jets, 22 carries, 75 yards, 2 catches, 10 yards. In Week 11 versus the Ravens, 17 carries, 59 yards. So the only thing with Judkins, he's not going to catch the football out of the backfield. And we know this Brown team all season long, they're going to be trailing early and often like they have, and continue to do that the remainder of the season. But Judkins, he gets a big workload, good physical back in between the tackles. And Jerome Ford and Sampson, obviously not factors in this backfield besides on passing downs. He's got a good matchup this week at Vegas. 15th most fantasy points to backs on the season. I know San Francisco, it's going to be tough versus them to play in a tight ball game. the way the Browns have played this season. But like I said, Junkins, he's getting a big workload, and some weeks, even in ball games, they'll trail. He's going to work his way into volume, so he's a player I will buy low this week. Well, he struggled the last 3 out of 4 weeks. Next player, Woody Marks, another rookie of the Houston Texans. So Woody Marks, he's the man tone over there in the backfield for this Houston Texan team. I know the Texans, they struggled to win that ball game at Tennessee, where it took a field goal to win it 16-13. Marks, he's the man, like I said. Joe Mixon, we haven't seen him all season long. He's not going to do much. And Nick Chubb as well, the last couple weeks, he's really taken a backseat. Only 3 carries in last week's game versus the Titans. So the last few weeks here for Marks, Week 9 versus Denver, 10 carries, 27 yards. Week 10 versus Jacksonville, 14 carries, 63 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 18 yards. In Week 11 at the Titans, 18 carries, 44 yards, a catch, 7 yards. Some Marks, I want to see a little bit more out of him, obviously, catching the football out of the backfield. But the last couple weeks, going off the touches and the work, obviously, he's been getting way more than Nick Chubb in this backfield. And I've said this in other videos. Unfortunately, it looks like the best days are behind Chubb, where he's dealt with a lot of devastating knee injuries over the last couple seasons. So with those factors and Marks, the last 2 out of 3 games, he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. He's a player by this week. The next player, Rondé Gatson of the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers, they came off a bad stinker, getting blown out in a game they should have won 35-6, where they were heavy favorites in this one going to Jacksonville in Week 11. But like I said, any given Sunday, any team nowadays could beat anyone. So Week 12, they're going into bye, and now Week 13, I think they regroup, have a big offensive performance with the Vegas Raiders coming into town. So the last few weeks for Gatson, Week 9, Tennessee, 5 catches, 68 yards. Week 10 versus Pittsburgh, you left early with a quad bruise, 3 catches, 13 yards, 6 targets. In Week 11 at Jacksonville, like I said, this offense didn't generate anything in a plus matchup. 2 catches, 41 yards on 5 targets. So the bye coming up here in Week 12 for Los Angeles. And then Week 13, they get back and they got a good matchup versus Vegas. So with him struggling the last 2 weeks and banged up a little bit and going on bye, I think it's a perfect time for fantasy owners to go out there and buy him low. And like I said, Gatson, he's one of the better tight ends in the league already, in my opinion, in his rookie season. And the final play is his teammate, Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Herbert, he was on a tear for a majority of the season, but the last 2 weeks, his numbers have come back down to earth. So Week 9 at Tennessee, he had a monster ball game in that one. 250 passing, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 57 rush yards, a touchdown. Week 10 versus Steelers, 220 pass yards, a touchdown, 19 rush yards. In Week 11 at the Jaguars, 81 pass yards only, an interception, 3 carries, 21 yards. So like I said, that's hard to believe that he only had 81 yards. I know he left the game a little bit, and that was Herbert, but he returned to the lineup. So now going on bye, and a good matchup coming up in Vegas. In the last 2 weeks, like I said, his numbers are down. Is Justin Herbert. He's a perfect buy low play. I'm not saying you can get him much on a discount, but with the 2 bad games and now a bye, that's pretty much 3 weeks and not doing much for this Los Angeles Charger and fantasy owners. And he's a player I would send feelers out there. So with the trade deadline coming up in most fantasy leagues this week, that's a few plays I'd look to buy and trade for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.